And as the name of our show implies, the Health and Wealth Radio Show, each week we also try to help you with the healthy part of your retirement years. And Jeff, we bring back Dr. Catherine Ross once again today to talk a little bit about diet, talk about health. We started this conversation last week, got a lot of response on it, and we want to make sure that we continue with some great information again this week.
Well, let's just recap a little bit. First off, welcome, Dr. Ross. We'd love to have you back. Thank you.
Thank you. Good to be here, Jeff.
Good. Let's just recap a little bit for the listeners out there. One of the things we want to talk about is that one of the concerning facts that were brought up last week is that 40% of Americans are overweight or obese, clinically obese, and that's a lot of people. And so what we want to make sure is that all the listeners take away from this is that if you're going to start a diet plan or an exercise plan, we urge you to consult your physician or to give Dr. Ross a call. Her office number is 949-650-8700. We want you to do it right, and we want to make sure that there are some diets we've talked about off the air that could be dangerous for people.
Absolutely.
So we want to make sure that you do this thing right. You do it if you are obese, if you're one of those 40%. You do it under a physician's care. And we do it safely, and so you have the results and they stick. Okay, so the last week we talked about obesity and weight loss. We talked about how big the problem is. We talked about some of the diseases and the problems that are related to those diseases, such as blood pressure, metabolic syndrome, prediabetes. And really shocking was that the fact that 650,000 people have heart attacks every year related to this, and 300,000 of those people die. So this is pretty important as far as I'm concerned. But let's bring us back and let's talk about kind of how did we get here, Dr. Ross? How did America become so overweight?
Well, just a minor correction, Jeff. 650,000 people actually die from cardiac events, and 300,000 are from sudden deaths. In other words, they had no warning.
Mm-hmm. So it's worse than I thought. So pay attention, everybody.
It's definitely a big problem. And other things that are related, sleep apnea, we talked about cancers that are related. Mm-hmm. There's also fatty liver. What happens with gaining weight is that fat is not just subcutaneous, it's also distributed around the organs and even into the organs. So fatty liver is something, as a gastroenterologist, I'm certainly seeing in a lot of patients these days, and it can be dangerous. 1/3 of patients with fatty liver will go on to have cirrhosis. Now, cirrhosis is increasing inflammation to the point where they get scar tissue. If they get enough scar tissue in the liver, it's called cirrhosis. And if the cirrhosis continues, it can decompensate and can actually be a cause of death or need of a liver transplant. So it's a very serious disease. And without any other predisposing factors, hepatitis, alcohol, just the fatty liver alone, 1/3 of those patients can progress to cirrhosis. So that, in and of itself, is another huge problem related to obesity. So how we got there? Well, lifestyles and the foods that we eat over the past 20-plus years have changed drastically. Mm-hmm. And people also gain weight with stress. So I think we probably all feel we've got stress. There's lack of sleep, that's a stress. Mm-hmm. Stress at work, stress at home, financial stress, stress with time, children, deadlines, family illnesses, and stress leads to increased cortisol. Mm-hmm. Now, cortisol, that's the fight or flight hormone. Mm-hmm. It has an inverse relationship to insulin. Insulin is the hormone that gets the glucose or the blood sugar into the cells. Mm-hmm. So when insulin can't do its job because there's too much cortisol, then the glucose, the sugars in the blood, get converted to fat. So the fat goes into the cells, and that's a major cause of obesity. Other hormones, of course, are related to gaining weight: thyroid hormone, estrogen, dopamine, serotonin. There's a hormone called ghrelin. Ghrelin is the hunger hormone. I think of it like ghrelin. Your stomach is growling. When ghrelin is increased, people feel hungry, and they will eat more.
Well, you brought up a good point, and you said in the last week's show that we need to eat more of a plant-based diet. And we talked a little bit about, you had a note here that our ancestors didn't work out at the gym. They didn't have any gyms, but by large, they were not obese. Was that because most of their food came from plant-based sources and we didn't have a lot of meat?
They came from plant-based sources mostly. I think it depends how many generations back you look in terms of having a lot of meat. Remember, our paleo ancestors, they had meat when they could find it and kill it. So that was a source. But they were primarily a plant-based type of diet. And I think in today's world, there are major changes, for instance, in the large agricultural centers where much of our food is produced. There's changes with the animal protein. The animals in those centers have pretty much crowded together, and they want to bring them to market very quickly. So if it's an animal that you're going to eat, let's say a steer, for instance, if it's a grass-fed steer, it can take 4 or 5 years for that animal to be able to reach 12 to 1,300 pounds where it would go to market. But in these large feeding lot centers, they feed them grains. And grains, first of all, are unnatural foods for these animals. So it changes the environment. They have rumens, and they're supposed to be eating alkaline grass. So they become very acidic. I think that's actually related to the problems that we're seeing with this toxigenic E. coli that's killed several people, children and elderly people, because the bacteria learn to live in that acid environment in the cow's stomach. Then, the foods that we eat are never sterile. So we eat that meat that's contaminated, and the acid in our stomach doesn't kill off the bacteria. Normally it would, because these are now resistant. So it can get into our systems, and it can cause a problem with illness, disease, and even death.
So grass-fed or organic beef is probably best, or chicken.
Right, wild-caught, organic. The other thing about those animals that are raised in these big feedlots, they're given hormones to bring them to the weight so that they can come to market. Even the cows that produce milk are given hormones, additional estrogen, and the fact that they're kept in a milk-producing state, they give them additional estrogens. The chickens are given additional estrogens so that they will lay more eggs. And they're given the estrogens to make them, the ones that we're going to eat, the animal flesh, they give them the estrogens so that they will become fatter faster. Well, guess what? It makes us fatter faster, too.
Sounds like it's all based upon corporate greed. More money, more faster production, and so I know personally myself, I tend to eat, such as you have recommended, grass-fed beef or organic and non-GMO, and so I try to stay within those lines, and hopefully you out there are doing the same thing. Let me ask you a question. Are pesticides involved with us gaining weight, and can they cause or contribute to obesity?
Absolutely. Pesticides, many of them are in a class called xenoestrogens. So organophosphates, organochlorides, and BPA. I think most of us know about the BPA. There's also phthalates, and phthalates are in plastics. Well, many of these hormones actually are in our food, and they are hormone disruptors. They disrupt our own natural hormones, and they act more like estrogen. So an oversupply of estrogen ultimately can lead to weight gain. And we're seeing also more cancers that are related to estrogen. There's breast cancer, prostate cancer, ovarian cancers. These things may be contributing. So 90% of the pesticides in this country are used in our food production. So that's an alarming figure, because the use of pesticides is growing annually. And they're everywhere. They're in our food, they're in our water, they're in soaps and detergents, these xenoestrogens, cleaning solutions, they're in our shampoos, cosmetics, plastic containers.
I know my significant other, we use special alkaline water, and we wash our produce in an 11.5 pH water. And what I found was that before I bought this water machine, she took some cherry rub tomatoes out of my refrigerator, filled up 2 clear plastic glasses, put tap water in one, asked me how I washed it, put cherry rub tomatoes in 11.5, mixed it around, and then poured it out. And the water, the 11.5 water stripped off the petroleum-based pesticides that I unknowingly was eating all those years. And the water was yellow. So the pesticides, I think, are a huge problem that we might not be aware of because they're so strong and they stick to the vegetables.
They stick to the vegetables. So here's a tip for those of you that don't have that type of alkalinizing water machine. And it's pretty simple. You can wash your vegetables, and even the organic vegetables need to be washed because they are probably contaminated with some pesticides as well. One organic field may be right next to a field that's using pesticides. Mm-hmm. So the tip is this. You can get a basin of water, add 1 drop of Dove liquid dishwashing soap, and mix that around. You take your vegetables, especially the ones that have a skin that you're going to eat, and you just dip it, swish it around. You can soak it a little bit and then you scrub it and rinse it. Mm-hmm. And that will get rid of most of those oily residue that are on the food that contain the pesticides.
Fantastic. Are there any other ways our food has changed, and are those things that are hidden in our foods that we eat, such as like we just talked about, unknowingly eating pesticides? What would be some of the other things we should learn about?
Well, antibiotics. Antibiotics are used a lot with animals that are part of our food products. Over 90% of antibiotics are used in the food production. I always think it's kind of interesting. They always tell doctors don't write prescriptions for colds and flus because most of those are viral, and that's true, and we shouldn't. Mm-hmm. But that is really such a small percentage of the antibiotics that are used in this country. They're being used widespread in food production. And the antibiotics are harmful because they kill the good bacteria, the microbiome that's very important in our own gut. Every person has between 4 to 5.5 or 6 pounds of bacteria living in their gut. And the combined DNA of all of those bacteria is actually more than the DNA in our own bodies. Now you ask, well, what good are they? Mm-hmm. We don't even know all the things that these bacteria do, but we know that they are essential for good health. They're probably part of what we call the mind-body connection because they can actually communicate through hormones and able to communicate between the gut and our brains. Mm-hmm. And they turn on certain things and turn off enzyme systems and hormones within our body. So you might think of that microbiome as a mini control center, and it's very important. That's why probiotics today are important for everyone to take at least daily.
Okay. You're listening to Dr. Catherine Ross, one of Orange County's top gastroenterologist, been in practice here in Orange County for over 25 years. She has offices in Newport Beach. I'm sure you're listening and you want to get in touch with Dr. Ross. You can reach her at 949-650-8700. That's 949-650-8700. Now back to some more information here, Annette. What about fast foods and the supersizing of meals? Do they contribute to obesity? I would think they would.
Oh, absolutely. Fast foods are so convenient and they're inexpensive. Unfortunately, sometimes a fast food meal may cost less than some healthy vegetables at the market. Mm-hmm. And the truth is, we like the taste. Our brain learns to become addicted, actually, to 4 different tastes. There's sugar or sweet, starchy, fat or fried foods, and salty. Now, pretty much all of those are what you find in fast food restaurants. Another problem with fast foods, to begin with, the nutrition in those foods is not very high. And then the preparation of them, so many of those things are cooked and maybe deep fried, such as the French fries, the onion rings, fried chicken, and so on, in trans fats. Well, trans fats and saturated fats are known to increase inflammation, which leads to atherosclerosis and heart disease. So those are make the foods even more unhealthy. And at least 20% of the calories from a fast food meal, typical fast food meal, are what you get from the trans fats. And if you're
Wow.
getting a supersized meal, then, well, that's even more calories from the fat. By the way, this month earlier, we had National Fried Chicken Day. So, it's interesting. We celebrate certain foods with a National Observance Day.
Now, you told me something when we were preparing for the show, and it really shocked me. And we're not going to name the fast food company, but tell us about how the tastiest French fries most everybody can probably taste right now, how they're prepared.
Well, everybody loves these fries. They are soaked in sugar water prior to frying. Then they deep fry in the trans fats, and then they come out nice and hot. They add salt. So that's satisfying a lot of these foods that our brain actually craves.
You're listening to the Health and Wealth Radio Show with Jeff Juniper, and today part 2 of our conversation with Dr. Catherine Ross. We're talking a lot about weight loss and some healthier choices that you can make to try to affect your weight in a positive way. And if you would like to sit down and talk to Dr. Catherine Ross, we would love for that to take place. 949-650-8700. 949-650-8700. Jeff, she has a couple of websites as well that you can check out as well.
Or you can reach her and take a look at her websites at krossmd.com or ocbeautifulyou.com.
Well, we're about to bring the show to a close, though, Jeff, but we have a lot more territory to go through as far as with Dr. Ross. What are we going to be handling next week?
Well, next week we're going to talk about the effects of sugar on your body, the dangers of eating low-fat foods versus regular fat foods, what genetics play in your diet and weight gain, and then starting a sensible exercise plan, all next week here on the Health and Wealth Radio Show at 12 noon on K-Bright.